So let's get started on completing your FY17 Annual Financial Report. When you first open your workbook, you're going to see many tabs across the bottom of your screen. The first tab that it opens to are the instructions. We will go over those instructions and add some practical information during this video. But for now, I need you to think about timing so that you can get this report done, published, signed, and electronically submitted before December 1st. There will be documents that you'll need to mail in to the Auditor of State, and the Thanksgiving holiday will interrupt mail service right before this is due, so please plan accordingly. Now let's get started. Page 1, the publication page. The first thing that you need to do on the publication page is fill out the name of your city. They are listed in a handy drop-down menu in alphabetical order. When you fill in the name of your city, it will populate your name, address, and some other material that we will cover later. Here's my first reminder: save your work and save it often. Nothing's more frustrating than putting in a lot of time collecting this information only to have it lost. I try to save mine after I complete each page. Now, we're going to move on because page 1 is a summary page. The blue cells are all numbers that are being pulled from following pages that you're going to fill out here in a minute. We need to complete part 1, 2, and page 13 before coming back to page 1. So here we go. Part 1, page 2, revenues and other financing sources. Here is a change from last year. At the top of the page, there are these little boxes for GAAP or non-GAAP cash basis accounting. In previous years, you needed to select one of the two boxes. This year, the non-GAAP or cash basis accounting will automatically be X'd when you open the workbook. If you're a city using GAAP accounting, you will need to move the X to the GAAP box. As I've said before, the worksheet is going to automatically put an X this year in the cash basis side. Let's get started working through the funds. You're going to see that there are 7 funds that we are going to be working through, and your accounting system for the city should already be using these different funds. If you're using accounting software, then you can run special reports to help you fill in these categories. So let's talk about these funds just to make sure that everybody is on the same page, or possibly to correct some things that were misposted in case you had questions about where they got put during the year. The first thing is the general fund. It is where you're going to find all of your revenues and expenses for your libraries, your park and rec, your swimming pools, and a lot of the other things that go on within your city. Your next category is going to be special revenues. And that's where you're going to find things like road use, or you may have local option sales tax. You may also have a levy for employee benefits under the property taxes line. Special revenues are called that because they are revenues that have some kind of string attached as to how they can be spent. The next column is your tax increment financing revenue. So if you have money coming in from a TIF district, this is where you're going to find it. It is separated out from the other special revenues because it is only activity going on with TIF. This is very, very important that you not mix project dollars in with this column. It is for tax increment financing only. Your next column is debt service. This is where you're going to be paying out your principal and interest for your general obligation bonds. And you can see in this sample report here that there are property taxes that are coming in to pay that principal and interest. So this is where you're going to put that so that it can be paid out in debt service. Your next category is capital projects. And capital projects is used when you have a project that may go over the fiscal year, so it takes up multiple fiscal years, or it may have different funding types. Maybe it got a grant, or it has transfers coming in from the general fund, or a little bit coming in maybe from water or sewer or one of your other proprietary funds. It is where you capture the picture of what happens financially, both on the revenue and expense side, for typically a big project. Your next column over is called a permanent fund. And a permanent fund is there because it's something that cannot be spent. It might be where you have money for the cemetery, if you have a perpetual care cemetery, or it's where gifts, where you can only use the interest and you can't spend your principal, but you could spend the interest that was given on a gift, that would need to be in the permanent fund. So it stays in its own special category so that you know, so that it can be accurately reflected for your auditors. Column H is referred to as the proprietary fund. It is also called the business fund or utility funds or enterprise funds. That is where the revenues have to support all of the activities and all of the expenditures so that we keep those separate because we know that that's all that money can be used for. That's reflected in column H. And in column H, you see a lot of the polka dot shading. Again, that means that we have blacked out the cells that you cannot use because using them would be poor accounting standards. So the form is trying to make it easy for you and not letting you use those columns. Budgeted internal services also goes into column H. Now, for those of you using budgeted internal service funds, that's like if you have a pool for purchasing, if you buy all of your supplies out of this pool, and that might include office supplies or tires or oils for your trucks or something like that. So if you have budgeted those items, then you would include them here in column H. If you have not budgeted those, then you'll just refer to those on page 1 if there's no budget cover. If you have any questions about that, feel free to give us a call. The last slide in this video has our contact information at the Iowa League of Cities as well as Iowa State Extension. So now we see this entire page again, which is page 2 of the revenues, and you will see that column A, B, C, D, E, and F are all summed together in column G, because those are your governmental funds, and there are different rules for governmental funds than there are for the proprietary funds, and that's why it has its own sum column. Column G and column H will sum together for you automatically by the worksheet into column I, and then column I will report to the front page or that summary page. Every tab and worksheet in this workbook works the same. Columns A, B, C, D, E, and F all sum to column G, and then columns G and H are added into column I, and those report directly to your front page, your summary page, page 1. So let's talk about the individual breakdowns of these revenues. Here, the first breakdown that we're going to look at are the property taxes. You may have property taxes only going into your general fund, or you may have them going into a number of different funds across the page. We're looking at the current property taxes. If you keep track of uncollected property taxes, you can put those in line 3 also. You will end up with a total of all property taxes available, totaled for you on line 6. If you have problems knowing what the breakdown is, and knowing which fund those property taxes need to go into, then you'll need to go back to the sheet that you received from the county treasurer with those deposits. That sheet can be used to tie out this report, or if you want to put them onto a separate spreadsheet so that you can present those to the auditor with a sum of the 12 months and which categories each of the revenues went into in those 12 months, you certainly can do so, and it may be helpful for you. On the report that you received from your county treasurer, you will also see tax increment revenue. It will be listed out separately and needs to be reported in its own column as money received from any TIF district. As you can see, the place to report that is in column C under TIF Special Revenue and row 7, TIF Revenues. Let's move down and look at other city taxes. Even though these may not be coming from your county treasurer, they are listed for the sake of the annual finance report under other city taxes. They may be utility tax replacement, hotel motel tax, or local option sales tax. The next thing we're going to look at are licenses and permits. Licenses and permits typically are recorded in the general fund. However, you may also have a permit for hooking up water or sewer that would go into column H, as those are for the enterprise or proprietary accounts. Some of the licenses and permits that would go in the general fund would include building permits and animal licenses. The next section under licenses and permits is section C, use of money and property. That would include interest on any accounts, and rent of any property or royalties or other miscellaneous use of the city's money and property. Most of us should have an entry for some type of interest. You may have entries under rents if you rent out City Hall or your swimming pool or any other city facility. Like before, each of the sections will be automatically summed by the workbook and shown in blue. Let's move to Section D, Intergovernmental Funds. Intergovernmental funds are revenues that are coming from other governments. It could be coming from the federal government, or you may be having money that is coming from a state or local government. And on this page, this screen only shows the section applicable for the federal government. So it might be something that was coming in from a CDBG grant, or it could be FEMA money or USDA money. Again, if those are grants, they are going to be considered special revenues because there are strings attached and you can only spend that money on a particular project. And so it's going to be totaled in column B. Continuing in section D, now on page 3, you will see there is a special box just to report road use taxes. Road use tax is reported separately because of the constitutional requirement that it only be spent on road-related expense. The place to report road use tax is column B, special revenue, line 44. The total that you report in that cell should be the same as what you reported for the road use tax report for the Department of Transportation that is due on September 30th. If you don't have that report done, you might want to put this one aside a little bit and finish that one up. But in either case, column B, row 44, should be the same amount that you received from the state for road use taxes. You may have other state grants and reimbursements to report. There could be money that came in either to the general fund or in special revenues or potentially even over in the capital projects fund that was given to you through a grant from either the Department of Transportation or possibly the Department of Natural Resources. There are many opportunities for cities to be receiving grants for many different projects, and this is where you would report those. A relatively new revenue from the state for your community may be the commercial and industrial replacement claim. If you have commercial property and have filed a claim, then this is where you would report that revenue. Commercial and industrial replacement claim should not be confused with the backfill amount that's coming in as part of the commercial and industrial backfill. I would suggest that you put those on separate lines. So in this particular city, you can see the commercial and industrial replacement claim is for $10,000 and the backfill amount is for $46,000. Again, you're going to be keeping them separate in the chart of accounts, so reflecting them separately on this report will help you explain these two items to the council and to your citizens. Moving on to local governments and reimbursements, you can see that there may be contributions made from the county, perhaps for library services or for a service that your city is providing that the county isn't having to. You may also be receiving money for library service or potentially from your township, or you may also have revenue coming in for fire and EMT service. These local grants and reimbursements are filled out in column A, lines 63 through 66. They are the last piece of your intergovernmental block. Your workbook will add together your federal total from line 33 on page 2 with the total state from line 60 and total local from line 70 to give you a total for the category of intergovernmental. Just a reminder as we're moving along here to keep saving your work often. I know you're putting in a lot of numbers and we would hate to have those get lost. So let's look at the rest of section E on page 3, charges for fees and services. Those charges for fees and services are going to be for things like water, sewer, electric, landfill, and a lot of them are going to fall under the proprietary fund. These utilities that are reported in the proprietary fund have been created by ordinance, and their fees are listed in ordinances and changed by ordinances that are all adopted by the council. Those fees should support all of the activities for that utility. However, some communities do have items like landfill or garbage that are collected in the general fund and are handled by a third party. If they are a general fund revenue, make sure that they are reported in column A. We are now finished with page 3. Remember to save your work before moving on. Let's look at page 4. It is a continuation of section E, charges for fees and service. Page 4 details out many of the items that a city might be collecting funds for. It includes cable, internet, telephone, stormwater, police services, sidewalks. All sorts of things are listed out on this page. Primarily, the revenues that you're going to report for the list on this page are either going to fall under column H, proprietary, or column A, the general fund. You may be receiving money from an ambulance run, possibly from the person themselves or from their insurance. You could be receiving money for the sale of a cemetery plot. That would be reported on line 98. You could have money coming in from park and recreation. This might be fees to get into your pool. You could have fees for animal control. If somebody has to pay to pick up their dog that's been roaming free, it would be reported on line 101. You also have a space to report other charges. If you make an entry under other charges, you'll want to make notes as to where those charges came from so that when you have to look back at your annual finance report, either for the council or for a citizen that comes in, you'll have the answers right there without having to go and dig for them. The workbook is going to total up all of the charges for service in section E and give you a total for lines 73 through 103 and report that number again on your summary page. Now, let's move on to sections F and G. These are also on page 4. In section F are special assessments. Special assessments are when the city council decides that they need to do a project and they want to assess the cost of that project to the people who are affected by it. This is where the revenues for that type of projects would be listed. So let's get through section G. This would be contributions that were given to the city, deposits that came in from sales tax refunds or fuel refunds. It could be the sale of property or merchandise that the city has. It might be fines that were collected by your library or your police department, or other internal service charge. And again, there's another miscellaneous category. So if you have something you feel that just doesn't fit anywhere else, you can place it here, but make yourself a note. It will save you a ton of time later to not have to go back and figure out where that number came from. Now, all of these sections that we've been working on are going to sum for you. And they're going to all add up at the bottom. They're going to add up into those blue numbers. It's all going to add up on line 121. It's going to be the total of the revenues. So it's going to be the things that you've done on page 2, 3, and 4 are all going to sum together automatically in the workbook. And unfortunately, it just didn't fit at the bottom of page 4, so it's at the top of page 5. And here it is. Total revenues, which is the sums, and it tells you which lines they come from. And it's starting to give you subtotals. So there's all of the money added up so far that came in as revenue. So you can see the total of all of these revenues that we have been putting in so far are all summed up here on line 121. Now, we still have to deal with section H. That's the proceed of bonds, loans, or short-term notes, except for internal borrowing in TIF. Now, when you have a bond or a loan come in, you initially need to report those proceeds in these categories. You may have proceed of capital asset sales or long-term debt, or you may have just short-term debt, and there's lines for each one of those so that you can accurately reflect them, and they need to go in the appropriate column, which is typically general fund, could be capital projects, might be into the proprietary fund if you have a project you're working on for water or sewer. You need to separate out internal TIF loans and transfers in. They have their own lines, 127 and 128. If you're using the standard chart of accounts and you're using a software program that lets you search by row, you can actually run a report for those rows and it'll print out for you 127 and 128. You need to be sure that transfers in onto this page equal transfers out that we're going to put in later. So the total of other financing sources is on line 131. And again, the workbook automatically sums that for you. And then it adds together the total that you put in before of 121 and 131 to give you total revenues on line 132. Okay, let's get page number 5 and the revenues finished up here. The last thing that you need to do is put in your beginning fund balance. That's on line 134. And your beginning fund balance for each fund should match your clerk's balance as of 7/1/2016, or should match the ending balance of last year's AFR. And if you can't find last year's AFR, remember I showed you on the Auditor of State's website where you can go and pull it back down from. If for some reason it does not match, you have corrected something in your accounting or found something that was misposted and made a correction, then there's a place for you to explain that on page 13 under the remarks section, and we'll get to page 13 eventually, so don't worry about it right this minute. The total revenues and other financing sources on line 136 should match the total requirements line 271 on page 12 when part 2 is completed. And we'll do part 2 next, so you can ignore that for right now as well. Just a reminder, we have finished part 1. You definitely want to make sure at this point that you save your work. Now we will be moving on to part 2.